You're listening to a Corridor Business Journal podcast.
It's time for straight talk about diversity, frank questions, honest answers, and real insights. It's Diversity Straight Up, brought to you by Green State Credit Union, with your hosts Sarika Bhakta of Nikkei Diversity Consulting and Anthony Arrington of Top Rank Professional and Executive Search Firm. Diversity Straight Up, brought to you by Green State Credit Union, is a Corridor Business Journal podcast. On today's episode, business leader, social impact advisor, and author Michele Sullivan.
Always take the high road. When I'm given a hard time or something, I really try to make it a teaching moment on the positive side and either correct someone very politely or you politely kind of ignore them to move on. But I do think whichever way you choose, if you do it politely so that they save face, I think that's a much higher and more effective teaching moment.
We'll be right back.
Green State Credit Union is proud to sponsor Diversity Straight Up. Established in 1938, Green State is Iowa's largest financial cooperative, serving nearly 250,000 members of all walks of life. Green State's products include checking accounts, loans, investments, insurance, commercial services, mortgages, and credit cards. Profits are returned to members in the form of better rates on deposits and loans. We encourage you to learn more at greenstate.org. Green State is federally insured by the NCUA and is an equal housing opportunity lender.
Welcome to another episode of Diversity Straight Up, brought to you by the Corridor Business Journal. We are at Season 2, everyone. Thank you for all the love, support, and commitment to help us continue on this journey. I'm your co-host, Sarika Bhakta.
And I'm Anthony Arrington, and we're looking forward to a great show today. It's going to be an exciting time. It's going to be, we're going to have a great conversation. We've got a wonderful guest, and we're looking to have a great conversation today.
Yes, before we get to Michele Sullivan, there's something on my mind. Something's on my mind, Anthony.
It's election time. It's election time, Sarika.
How'd you know that was on my mind?
Had to be.
Countdown, 19 days till the U.S. presidential election. I know that we talk about diversity. Politics is part of the diversity conversation. It's part of our multi-dimension, our ideological beliefs when it comes to politics. I also have heard from a lot of employers now leading up to the election, as well as post-election that week, how are we going to be able to support the high emotions that are going to be occurring in the workplace with their employees, as well as what's happening in the communities?
You know, it's going to be tough, Sarika. There's going to be a lot of emotion that week. I mean, if we're being straight up honest about it, there's going to be so many emotions, and the question is, what are leaders going to do within their organizations to allow that space? No matter how the turnout, I think it's going to be important to allow open conversations. You know, I know if I were leading a company, one of the things I may do is be proactive about my conversations. Maybe there's a statement that the organizations need to make to their staff, to their colleagues, to remind them again of it's okay to feel comfortable. I know some organizations are allowing vacation times and taking days off. Whatever it takes, as one of our prior guests on the show said, whatever it takes.
Thank you for sharing that, because I know we've always talked about being an authentic leader. We need to be able to have an understanding of our own feelings and our own emotions and be able to have these conversations, because it will be hard to show up at work, regardless of however we know an outcome will happen. Maybe not right away, which is going to be lingering, which can also have an impact in the workplace.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. You know, it's if we don't put ourselves in a space, if we can't push through from an emotional and professional standpoint as human beings and adults. And I know I can speak for me personally. I know that I'm going to be challenged. You know, we all have these challenges. I know that it's an emotionally challenging time for me personally. I got to find a way to push through it. I'm a leader too. You're a leader too. So that's what leaders do, right? They push through during adverse times.
Very true. And I know that we have to agree to disagree,
Yeah.
because this is going to impact me personally in my family realm,
Mm-hmm.
as well as in the workplace, as
Yeah.
well as in the community as well.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, I know that we can continue to go on with this
can.
hot topic that is going on, but I wanted to just, have a conversation as it was on my mind.
No, we were kind of guessed. I thought that's probably where we were headed. So, so
There's a lot on my mind keeping me up these days,
I know.
Anthony.
Hey, like we say, a lot going on in that upstairs, right?
Well,
But-
let's get to what's on our guest's mind,
Yes,
okay?
yes.
Shall we do it?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
What's on our guest's mind? Well, we have with us Michele Sullivan. She is a globally recognized leader and advisor in social impact, TEDx speaker, and author. During her 30-year career at Caterpillar, she served as president of Caterpillar Foundation and director, corporate social innovation at Caterpillar, Inc. Throughout her time with the foundation, Michele has transformed it from merely transactional to global and strategic. This strategy places the human need first, not as an afterthought of profit. Michele is well known for her global expertise and sustainable and collaborative approach to philanthropic investing. Michele strongly believes monumental and sustainable change in our largest global challenges can only happen through partnerships and collaboration between public, private, and nonprofit entities. Not only that, Anthony, but she's also the author of Looking Up, How a Different Perspective Turns Obstacles into Advantages. I'm looking forward to learning more about Michele. Michele, thank you so much for
Thank
being a
you.
guest exec on Diversity Straight Up podcast. Welcome.
We love
Thank
hanging
you.
with superstars.
This is, you're right. I'm hanging with the superstars, both of you. I've been looking forward to this.
Well, thank you, Michele. Well, let us get to know you a little bit more. Where did you grow up and your career path? And I know a stint of it was also at Caterpillar before you moved on doing the amazing work that you're doing right now. So share us a little bit about your journey.
Thank you. I was born in Central Illinois quite a few decades ago. And, to my parents' surprise, I was born a little person. I have a very rare type of dwarfism, and I stand 4 feet tall. And, my parents right off the bat treated me like all the other siblings and like everyone else. And I really didn't know I was little until I went to kindergarten, and the kids told me, they recognized that there was something different about me. And I had no idea until then. And I knew early on, though, that education was a key for me, because I wasn't going to be able to do things like construction or fireman or anything like that, that entailed a physical physicality being a big part of the job. So I knew that education was my key. And so I went on to get a bachelor and a master's degree at Bradley University, which is in Central Illinois as well. It's a private university. And while in graduate school, I co-opted for IBM. But I also knew that with Caterpillar being headquartered in Peoria, that I knew I could have a very diverse global career, and that did come to fruition. My dad worked at Cat for 30 years and retired. My sister still is at Caterpillar, so we're definitely a Caterpillar family. And I had the privilege of having quite a few jobs at Caterpillar and ending up in the foundation, which brought two passions. Caterpillar and the nonprofit space are two of my passions. And it really brought that together for me. And, I got to see a lot as I traveled the world, and I spent most of my time in the underdeveloped countries. Mm-hmm. And so as you talked about the election, what struck me really was that we have to remember that we still are one country and we are one people. However it turns out, in your favor or not in your favor, we still have to be one, because as you look around the world when there's an election or not even an election,
Right.
So many people are stifled that they don't even get to vote.
Yeah.
And remember, it wasn't that long ago that women couldn't vote here.
Mm-hmm.
So
true.
we do have to celebrate our independence and still remember that we are one people.
Yeah.
And that we have to collaborate. And I would be remiss if I didn't think that Washington could learn a little bit about that instead of it being so divisive among the party lines.
Sure.
It makes it hard for the people to come together as one when our leaders are having trouble. But nonetheless, we still are one people, and that we must, support each other. Just look around the world. When I was in Africa my last time a couple of years ago, just in the week I was there, several countries on the continent had changed leaders just because of a coup or something.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have that here.
Right.
So, I do get excited when I do have the right to go vote.
Yeah.
And, it's an exciting time and also a bit of a stressful time, I do admit.
Well, being a pre-law political science major, I love talking about this, and being born in Gujarat, India, the world's largest democracy, and now living in America, another big democracy, I know the value that we have to really embrace and appreciate the opportunity to be able to vote and be able to make impact.
It's a good segue too, Michele. You mentioned what I loved hearing you mention. I know you talked about this in your book, and we'll get into that a little bit. But you mentioned that we're all one. And I think as I think about your upbringing, you and I have something in common. We're one of I'm a bilateral amputee. I've been an amputee below my knee for 30 years. You talk a little bit about the seen and the unseen and your conversation, but we're one of 26% of the people in America. One out of every 4 of us have a disability, and you and I share that space. And I'm curious. Obviously, we believe that we're one, and we all believe that we're one. But as you talked about, your elementary experience taught you that there was some difference, right? And you didn't realize that. Can you talk about the impact of your disability on your upbringing and on your journey, and how you were able to overcome some of those to make it to what I would consider the American dream in terms of what you do? Can you kind of talk about your challenges and your hurdles through that process?
So, as a child, it was difficult because anywhere I went, I got stared at because you really don't see a lot of little people around, and a lot of people think about the circus or something when you do see a little person. When in reality, in today's world, we're as educated as everybody else and can hold any, position as well. So, but nonetheless, when you're a child and you don't quite understand the differences or what it really means, it was difficult, and I hated to go out in public. I'd always hide behind my parents' legs there for a while. But as I went along in school, I discovered that I had a knack for education, and that, I could pick things up quickly, and I was blessed with a good mind most of the time. My family tell you I lose my mind sometimes. But, I had got good grades and everything. So, and even as first or second grade, we played this math game called Around the World, where the teacher would have flashcards.
Love it.
And you'd land at somebody's desk, stand next to it, and then whoever said the answer first got to move along to the next desk. And I won all the time. Math was, come to find out, math was my forte, one of them. And so I became known as the girl that was smart in math, not the girl that's so little. So it's quite interesting that as the other kids, saw me as something different, then I started to recognize it in myself.
Right.
And in the book, I write about that, while my size certainly talks to the title of looking up, since I look up to most people physically, but literally I look up, but also figuratively, I look up to everyone. It taught me the best relational posture is that we all have value.
Yeah.
And so early on, when the other kids saw me for something else, it really started to trigger with me what my parents would always tell me, that I can do anything. And so as I went along in school and got good grades and saw that education was a pathway for me, as it is for everyone when you think about it. But I was afforded a great education. And so, when I was 23 when I graduated with my master's. I was working at IBM and transitioning over to Caterpillar. And I felt like I needed all of that so that I would be on par with everybody else when I interviewed. And, I got on at Caterpillar, now 32 years ago. I retired 2 years ago. And I had a great career. And they were very open. And when I got the Caterpillar Foundation job, which is one of the most visible jobs at Caterpillar, because it's such a global company, it really showed me and others that, they go by, who does the job. And that is a lot of what we all strive for, because you can see one of my differences, which is my size, but it's not my only difference or my only challenge. You can see mine. I maybe can't see Anthony's, if he has long slacks on. But, people are suffering with mental illness, or so many have lost their jobs today and have money issues. Some people may be going through infertility. All this you can't see. So we must be very open to people and also look up to everyone. Because at the end of the day, we all have value, and I look up to you. So, my journey has been quite a journey, and it goes through ups and downs like everyone else. But early on, I figured out that, you know what, I can do anything. I can do anything.
Well, Michele, that's a beautiful sentiment when it comes to values of your own personal self, as well as values that others have as well. You've mentioned many times education is something that you value tremendously. And in your role at the foundation at Caterpillar, being a global position, a very visible position, I want to segue a little into unconscious bias. And we know that unconscious bias has a lot of impact on our decision making. And when people don't know you and they see you being in a very visible role, we know unconscious bias can also be learned, on top of it, be unlearned. Can you share with us some experiences that you had with unconscious bias when you were interacting with global leaders?
Sure. I can always tell in the first 15 seconds of meeting anyone if they're going to look past my size. And it's quite a surprise to some people as I show up.
Not me.
And but I have to say, whenever I would meet with, especially prominent leaders, they know quite a bit about me before I ever show up, because there's been a lot of dialogue before the actual meeting. But with that being said, in other countries, someone, with my dwarfism or disability, whatever you want to refer to it as, are not open to people like myself. And as a matter of fact, if you were born with, dwarfism in some countries, you certainly aren't seen or educated or anything like that. So I was very fortunate to be born in the United States. But they all knew that I was there representing the Caterpillar Foundation, and we were ultimately both working on making the lives better for those who, most of the time, we were working on poverty. So we were both there with the same mission, and that Caterpillar cared and really wanted to make a difference. And I happened to be the person in the chair sitting there with them, working on the same issue. So it really, as we would talk, you could tell it really didn't matter, that I am Michele first, who happens to be a little person.
Right.
And so it really is a non-issue for me and for them. And we really got to some great collaborative programs that made a big difference in a lot of people's lives. So I have to say that I really did not have a lot of struggles in that role, because they knew that, one, Caterpillar carries a big brand, global brand. Right. And so, everywhere I went, Caterpillar is covered by, or that area is covered by a Caterpillar dealer. So they're very familiar with Caterpillar. So they were thrilled that Caterpillar showed up.
Alliant Energy is a place where I can create the future, where my skills, creativity, and new ideas make a better tomorrow. I help deliver the energy powering moments that matter to you. It's where we care about the environment and our neighbors, a place where my talents and skills grow. My job isn't a job, it's my passion, my place, my purpose, because I am energy. See how you can put your energy to work at alliantenergy.com/careers.
As a global citizen, you're recognized differently as a person with a disability in the United States than other areas of the world where you could be ostracized, considered a person who was cursed, right, at birth.
Right.
But you've been able to, as a leader, use your power, platform, privilege to really drive that purpose in those areas of the world and get past that bias that Sarika mentioned. And it brings me to something else that I was listening to. I was listening to your podcast, and you talked a lot about, I was listening to your TED Talk, and you talked about your travel and some of the everyday challenges with travel that many people don't think about, whether it's your wheelchair or us. And I'm with you, because we get frisked every time we go to the airport.
Right.
We have to go through the frisking that other people don't every single time. It's not even.
I call it legalized groping.
It is. It's legalized groping, and I'm with you.
And I've been trying to work with the TSA on different avenues for that, but go ahead.
Right. The one thing that stuck out to me, though, is you talked about, you had a couple scenarios where you talked about once people got to know you, the baggage claim handler, the agent, and you got to have conversations, you really got to teach them something, or they learned something about you. I was really intrigued by the gentleman that you sat next to in the plane that saw you in the bathroom and you had this embarrassing moment, but you used that opportunity to have conversation with him because he happened to be sitting next to you in the plane, and you said by the end of that plane ride you guys were like friends, and you were able to pretty much teach him something about life. And so how do you use that platform and your privilege to do that constantly? And how does that affect your leadership style, how you communicate? Because you seem to have what you say, that gift of gab. And how does that work?
You know, I find that to make people comfortable, and this is a whole chapter in the book, if you make the first move, meaning I go up and start the conversation, I still can tell if they're going to shut me out, and then I move on. But most of the time, people are relieved and they just start talking to you. Mm-hmm. And so I do think that making the first move is a wonderful way to break the ice. And it helps them as well. And again, always take the high road. When I'm given a hard time or something, I really try to make it a teaching moment on the positive side, and either correct someone very politely, or you politely kind of ignore them to move on. But I do think whichever way you choose, if you do it politely so that they save face, I think that's a much higher and more effective teaching moment than if you react to their ignorance. A lot of times it's ignorance and I don't mean it in a bad way, but they don't know about little people, for instance, or someone like in your situation. They've never had to deal with it. And so I truly don't think it's on purpose. I think it's more out of ignorance that they've never had to deal with someone or maybe seen a little person. So I try not to take it negatively on their part. So I really try to take the higher ground and make it a better teaching moment that way. And so when the gentleman did open the door on me in the bathroom on the plane, you know, he was more embarrassed than I was. I was sitting down. So, but what are the odds of him sitting across from me on an airplane?
Right.
And as I stepped out and I saw him there, then it was hard for me because I could see his face. And so as I walked towards him, I leaned up towards him as I, got to the row. And I said, "Are you going to remember this as much as I am?" And of course he is. So, humor is a wonderful thing because he laughed and it broke the ice. Yeah. And I wanted him to know that, it was an accident, and I don't think anything about it. So as we talked, through the rest of the flight, he forgot about it. I'm sure he didn't completely forget about it. I'm sure he's not talking about it like I do. I don't know that I would talk about it if I opened the door on someone. But, I wanted him to know that, it's fine. We're still good.
Right.
And when the plane landed, he had noticed when I got on that somebody put my bag up above, and he asked if he could get my bag down. And he probably wouldn't have done that had we not chatted and got to know each other.
Right.
He would have gotten off the plane without giving it a second thought. And so when you think about it, it ended on a good note, and we both learned something.
Do you have a lot of
And
those moments as a leader, where those teaching moments? Because I
do.
see the analogy there of, with a race in an office, right? In a lunchroom,
Right.
maybe.
Exactly.
There's a lot of white men right now who are afraid to say things because they're afraid to make a mistake. And it's an opportunity to be a teaching moment.
Yep, I understand that too. And, obviously being a white person, I understand that because, we want to learn too. So if you do say the wrong thing and someone jumps at you for whatever reason, you're really not allowing that person to learn, because most of the time people don't mean to hurt somebody's feelings.
Right.
I'm not saying it doesn't happen, because
Right.
it does, but we still are one, and we need to, really be open to each other and what each other's challenges are, and also how do we collaborate to make a difference. And our differences bring us together. And remember, we thrive because of people, not in spite of them. And the purpose in life is to thrive, not just survive. And so I really hope that we, come together more than we are today in every way, whether it's race, religion, you name it. It seems like, everybody has an opinion against some other group. And I really hope that, we can come together more and learn from each other and take a higher learning and teaching moment. And as a leader, the best thing you can do is, trust your folks and say, I do believe in you. And when somebody says that, it was said to me so many times at Caterpillar, you have to give people opportunity to succeed and to fail. When you fail, I can guarantee you learned more than if you succeeded on the first time around.
Michelle, I always think about it being like the growth mindset. We always want to be lifelong learners. And we do learn a lot when we don't get to those outcomes that we thought were going to be optimal.
Right.
And,
exactly.
There's a lot of intersectionality that we all have. And I want to talk a little bit about you and women's empowerment and girls' empowerment. I know that is something that you also believe dearly in, and also go on the speaking circuit to really inspire and empower this group as well globally. And I think that you gave an example of injustice for women by saying that an 11-year-old girl should not be getting married. In my culture, being Indian, I have seen so much around marriage because that is such a huge bedrock of institution. It's a very patriarchal culture as well. So as a girl who's young and gets married, she's going from one patriarchal family and being transferred as an object to another patriarchal family. So when I, read this, it really hit me. Share a little bit about your thoughts on this.
Oh, I'm sure it did hit you, and you're right. That is one country that definitely, has a different culture than what I grew up in. And so one of the pillars of the Caterpillar Foundation was to really elevate the opportunities, education, and basic human needs for girls and women, because as the family goes, it's because of the women in the family. In the United States, if you ask most people, who makes the family go, they would, if they're honest, they're going to tell you it was the mother.
Mama. I'm going to tell you, it was mama.
Yeah, exactly. And, I was raised by a strong woman. So, when you think about it, getting them educated early on their health is better. They're not less likely to get married at a younger age. They're more likely to be involved in civic leadership. They're more likely to go on to support the family, because women also put much more of their money back into the family than men do. And that's also what supports the family. So if you really want a community to strive, you can't leave half of them behind, and that's the girls and the women. It won't succeed. And so when you think about how do we lift women and girls up, it's through those pillars that I just talked about that we invested heavily in, especially in the underdeveloped countries. But even here in the United States, we have a long way to go. A lot of the women's rights, are, I would argue, being threatened right now, and we can't have that.
Yep.
So
we can't have that.
Michele, just to piggyback on this, especially now with a global pandemic, we know that it is impacting women and working women, as well as women that are, taking lead in the household. And there's a lot of studies that are coming out, and some of the data is indicating that this is going to have an impact on women and their professional career and aspirations and trajectory. What do you think about this? And what are some solutions you would offer them?
Right. Obviously, I hope not, but being a realist, I think it will hurt them. And I think that we have to continue to remain strong and be supportive of each other. And also the men have to recognize that, the women are as successful as anyone, and that they make great leaders. And that's been shown, time and time again. And so, we need everybody to lift everybody up. Minorities in general, not just women, by the way. This is minorities in general. That diversity to me is more than just race and what sex you are. To me, diversity is also your experiences. What have you experienced that, help build who you are and what you were exposed to in terms of, how people really live. Even in the United States, there's a lot of poverty. And as you go to underdeveloped countries, who can't vote, or someone in my situation or Anthony's never be educated or be seen in public. So to me, diversity is also diversity in thought and in experience. And we can't be afraid of that. We have to lean in and get to know people and also situations of others to really be well-rounded in making the best decisions.
Right. You talk about leaning in and you talk about advocacy, and in your 30 years at Caterpillar, they've allowed you to expand. I think I read, or I was listening in your MSNBC interview where you were talking about how prior to I don't know if maybe you, or I know you've only had about 4 people in that position, but you mentioned that Caterpillar was never involved in advocacy and policy. So what was it about you, or that change? Where was the flip switch, and how you as a leader was able to get them on that train to policy and advocacy, something they'd never done before?
So with the Caterpillar Foundation, we can't be involved directly with policy, which is, involves the legislature, but we can advocate an opinion or, a circumstance, so that when they go to vote or create policy, they can think about that. So for instance, the girls and the women and other types, for those in poverty, for instance, we advocated for them as well. And so when I got to the foundation, it was very transactional. We basically wrote checks. And so I really treated it like a business. And what was the return on investment on our grants? We were kind of like the Shark Tank, for example, when all the water grants came in. How do you decipher one from the other? And you look at return on investment. So all these water grants came in organizations, and it's like the Shark Tank. Who can do the most with a dollar in terms of how many people get access to water, working in the area that we want to work in? And so when you think about that, it really puts things on the table pretty equally. And also we required that they report out every year what was the result of the grant. And so at that point, it then becomes, where else do we want to invest our money? And, you kind of go from there. So advocacy to me is working at the grass tops. And then the organizations work with people on the ground, and that to me is the grassroots. But if you truly want to make exponential change, the grass tops is where it's at. Now, granted, just because you pass a law, for instance, that girls can't be married before, say, 15, that's not, as you know, it's not going to trickle down in a month or even a year. But it does start to change the culture. And that's why it takes a lot longer. But at the end of the day, it will start to take hold and become part of the culture. The same with those that are in poverty. So when you work on advocacy, that's the grass tops. And you also have to have investments at the grassroots. And that's where that came from. And we also worked heavily with our legal so that we could do that, in a legal way and not get, involved on the political side with policy directly. We just advocated.
I love that. I learned something new today. Grass tops
And
and grassroots. We got to remember
And
that.
you need both.
Yes.
Indeed.
I'll be cutting my lawn this weekend, so I'll remember that.
There you
Would
go.
I come and cut my lawn over as well? Give my husband a break here.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, Michele, I'm going to segue a little bit, and I want to talk a little bit about your book, Looking Up.
Mhm.
Can you share what was the impetus, what was the passion behind it that you wanted to go on this journey as an author?
For a long time, people have told me, Michele, you need to write a book about all your experiences and really educate people. And I was like, yeah, I was quite busy. I really didn't have time, but it was always in the back of my mind. And then, the last couple of years before I knew that I was going to retire, I did start thinking about it more. And I started going down the path of, what would the book look like? And I didn't want the book to be just about me because we all have a story. And I can't say that mine's any more interesting. I can put laughs and everything in, but I wanted it to be about the people I've looked up to in my life and who have looked up to me. And also the people I met through the foundation who I look up to, and they'll never know what they mean to me. And so I really put my head around all the people that the book would be about and who I truly look up to and, who have helped me along the way and looked up to me my whole life. And so that's where the book came from, and the title as well. Looking up really means about looking up to everyone, and it's really seeing the value that we have. And I really hope after the election, we all can get our head around more of that instead of really dividing us.
Well said.
And I'm afraid it may take a while, but I'm really hoping that we can come together more than we are today and really look up to each other.
I am a firm believer that humanity, we're always going to continue to evolve. That also means our belief systems as well. And if we can continue to engage in crucial, courageous conversations, I think it's going to continue to allow us to be able to move in that direction. As long as we can meet people where they are on their equity, diversity, inclusion, and engagement journey, but continue to move forward without blaming and shaming, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for sure.
Good point.
And respect everybody.
Good
Yeah,
point.
we're lacking that today.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's what I like working on.
Absolutely.
That we're more alike than we are different.
Yes. Well, Michele, thank you so much for sharing about your book. Where can our listeners go and get a copy or 2 or 5 for themselves and for their friends and colleagues?
Yeah, of course, any of the online things like Amazon, it's also at Barnes & Noble. So you can pretty widely, it's available pretty widely right now.
All right. You hear that?
And you can go to lookingup.com as well. And there's, excerpts from it also.
That's lookingup.com. And the name of the book is Looking Up, How a Different Perspective Turns Obstacles into Advantages. Go get that book.
It has received a lot of testimonials, I believe, from Bono, from U2, as well as Sheryl Sandberg and Mike Bloomberg, I believe. Is that correct, Michele?
Right. And you know what? A commonality across all those people, and there's, people who have endorsed it that you haven't heard of. But at the end of the day, we all came together because of our work in the non-for-profit space. So it's interesting that Everyone, we all met each other through our common passion.
That's great.
Yeah, it is great.
Well, I know that we can continue to have, conversations with Michele, but we're going to go ahead and go into our third segment of our podcast.
What's on our listeners' minds?
This is where we have a question from a listener. Actually, this is really interesting, Michele, because lately we've received quite a few questions and comments around a very similar topic question. Typically, we'll ask from one listener, but because lately we've been receiving a lot from many people, I am basically just going to ask the gist of what the topic or question is. Right now, around equity, diversity, inclusion industry, there's been an administrative executive order around diversity training, which has an impact with the federal government as well as the agency, as well as, contractors that do business with the federal government, where training on unconscious bias around white privilege as well as race relations, there could be fines, penalties, should this continue. And these are questions, a topic that we usually ask our guest exec. And Michele, this one is for you.
One of the first things we always do when we want to make a change is we want to count. You count how many diverse candidates you have, etc. And most of the time it's based on race and sex, when, as I said, there's many other types of diversity as well. So just because you send somebody through training, any type of training, doesn't mean that it's going to take. And that's my problem with just diversity training. I think we learn more when we actually experience it. Mm-hmm. But I also know that until you really force an issue, whatever the issue is, it's not going to get started most of the time. So diversity training is our way in the door to really broaden people's minds. But we have to go farther than that and really embed, diversity as a whole within the organization. So I would definitely continue to not only do the diversity training, but really live by the values of what it's intended to do. And so it's not enough just to train, but you have to really execute within the culture and walk the talk, or it's not going to work. Now, the other side of it is it's not going to change in a week or a year. And people want it to change very quickly, because you do have to have the right people in the right job. At the end of the day, you still have to do that. But we need to be open to who that pool that you're going to pick from is. And we all have unconscious bias. I have it. I took a lot of training in unconscious bias, and it was quite an eye-opener for me. So we all have it. So we all are struggling with this. We don't recognize it, though. And we really have to work hard to recognize it. So how do we really broaden the pool of people that we're looking at who can and are qualified to do the job? And if we need more diversity, which we obviously do, there's no question, how do we get that pool of people ready so that we can bring in more diverse candidates and have them ready to take on these roles? So I think just like we worked early on in a child's life with the foundation, how do we work earlier in the process to get more diverse candidates ready and willing to, take on these positions? I think we have to work early on in the process, not just when a job comes open. We need to be working way before that to give them the experience and really evaluate who can do the position and who can't, not based on what they are, but what their skill sets are. But we also have to make sure that everybody gets the same benefit to really get those skill sets early on. And I'm not sure that we're doing that. Right. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you, Michele. We appreciate you providing response to some of our listener questions around certain training that the executive administration is looking at banning, unconscious bias being one of them as well. So we know that diversity in of itself is not going to be the magic pill with just a training.
Right.
It has to be a very integrated, multifaceted approach, strategically, intentionally, to embed it throughout the organization and the firm and in our communities.
This starts early on in a person's life.
I always say brush your teeth moments, and at the end of the day, you have to look at yourself in the mirror every day.
Absolutely.
And it really starts with you, right?
And your children.
Yeah.
And the youth.
Yeah,
I agree, Michelle.
Yes.
Exactly. Yep.
All right. Well, we're going on to another portion of our podcast. This is a fun one, Michelle. This is where we have fun tossing a diversity thumb ball. It's a softball, so don't worry. I know my aim is horrible, and I probably knock a lot of Joe's equipment to the floor.
Right.
But I think, Anthony, if you show it to Michelle, she'll see it has a lot of questions and prompts on the diversity ball.
Okay.
So what we're going to do is we're just going to toss it back and forth, and we're going to take turns, and Anthony will actually toss one up in the air, and wherever his thumb lands, he's going to read the question or the prompt, and then that'll be yours to answer, and then we'll take rounds with each other as well.
Okay.
So it's a virtual ball we're throwing. I wish we could make it work. All right, so I'm gonna toss to you first, Sarika.
Oh, you are? Okay.
We'll start with you first.
Oh, barely. Okay. How might you personally combat prejudice and discrimination? I know I have grown as a person, and I've been able to be stronger to stand up to discrimination and prejudices that I see. Very, very hard growing up in the culture that I did.
Right.
And so I know that I stand up, even if it is swimming against the rest of the fishes around me. So I stand up, I'm very vocal, and I'm an advocate. And again, I do it in a way that allows for conversation to occur so that I can understand their perspective. More importantly, they're willing to listen to my perspective. So it's all about how I communicate, my tone, and the words that I'm utilizing. I'm going to create that connection so that we can have an open dialogue.
I love it.
All right.
Agree.
All right, well, this is going to go to you, Michelle, virtually, and Anthony's going to catch it.
All right.
Got it. Hey, Anthony.
All right. Michelle, the question is, in what way is your world diverse?
Well, that's a great question. You know, I have a very diverse village around me, and I talk about that in the book. I talk about my kitchen table, where you have a few people that you always have that you know, when something really good or really bad happens, there's always those few people you call, right? And I call that my kitchen table, which is, you know, my mom, my sister. And then I have my village, which I have a very big village that helps me do what I do and have, you know, made me become the person that I am. And I can tell you that I have a very broad spectrum of folks in every way that are around me. And also, I really try to stay involved in many different aspects of the community. And also, I go in even when I'm uncomfortable. I really force myself to lean into a situation that I don't necessarily, that I'm not very familiar with, or even the folks I'm not very familiar with for whatever reason. I maybe haven't met them or I don't know the topic. And I really push myself to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And you'd be surprised at how many people you get to meet in that way. And like you said earlier, you know, you lean in. And when you lean in, it forces you to really listen and be open to how other people are thinking or how they're feeling. And I think that's very important. And also being, you know, a collaborator. People go, oh, Michelle, you work for Caterpillar, you're a Republican. Oh, you're in the foundation, you're a Democrat. It's funny how we put labels. And I go, you know what? I'm a collaborator. So we get stuff done.
Yeah, we get stuff done.
Oh, yes, you
get
do.
her done.
Yeah, so that's how I do it. And I have a very diverse group around me. Very
diverse world. Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
That
Okay,
is so interesting, Michelle, when I think about how people may think of one arm of the company is all this and another arm that's doing philanthropic work is very, you know, slanted to one side. I never thought about...
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
That's how we put labels on us.
Kind of funny. All right, I guess it's my turn.
It
I'm going to
is.
throw the ball to myself here. All right, and my question is, how do people learn biases and stereotypes? I'm going to have to say it starts at a kitchen table, like Michele said. I think
I agree.
everything, we've talked about that a couple of times throughout this conversation today about how it starts at home and it starts in the mirror. So yes, that's how, bias and stereotypes get started. I've talked a lot of times about a bias I had, and I know I've shared this with you, against Harley Davidson riders. That when I was growing up, I thought everybody I knew that had a leather jacket on, I've told this story before, was a racist or a KKK member, right? Like it was, but it was a learned bias from the neighborhood I grew up in, or the people I hung around, or what I heard on TV and in my house, or what have you. So you learn them. Yep, absolutely. I think it starts at home at the kitchen table.
For our listeners, continue to submit your questions and comments to info@DiversityStraightUp. And now we're just wrapping up. But before we do, Michele, we do want to ask you, is there something that we have not discussed that you would like to share with us and our listeners?
I think remember to always make the first move. It helps with the situation for whatever reason. If you're a little nervous or the people aren't quite who you're usually hang out with or something, but make the first move. And also don't be afraid to ask for help. That's a chapter in the book, and it's also my TED Talk is asking for help as a strength, not a weakness. And in today's world, we're all challenged with the pandemic. It's causing us all to change everything we do, really. I mean, we can't hardly hug our loved ones, really, and that's not how we are.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to ask for help if you need it. And also don't be afraid to check in on people, because they may need help and they're not going to ask for it. So we have to be very sensitive at this time to help people. And I really think that's very important. I always believe in servant leadership, where I'm here to help you. And in my personal life also, because I need help every day reaching things and all kinds of things. So, I also have to return that to other people. So don't be afraid to ask for help. And also don't be afraid to make the first move, and keep looking up, because the view is great.
Thank you so much for that feedback. Very inspiring and a very engaging conversation that we had today.
Yes,
so
thank you.
really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Michele. You definitely made episode 1 of season 2 a very memorable one. And thank you so much. And go out and get a couple of books of Looking Up by Michele Sullivan, everyone.
Make a great day.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And for our listeners, please keep, this is, again, as Sarika said, this was season 2, our first episode. It'll be going video all year. We're looking forward to having some great guests, and stay tuned in to Diversity Straight Up.
Yes, season 2 is going video, so tune in.
Diversity Straight Up.
Keeping it real.
All right.
Thank you to our listeners, as we wouldn't be here without your support. Help us grow our subscriber base by sharing our show with others.
Love this new episode of Diversity Straight Up, brought to you by Green State Credit Union? Then head over to the most popular podcast audio platforms to describe, rate, and review us. And check out our other episodes while you're there.
Catch us on our next episode, which drops monthly.
We'd love to hear from you. Hit us up and send your questions, comments, and suggestions to info@diversitystraightup.com.
Remember, wherever you live, work, and play, our backyards are increasingly global. It's not enough to simply be a leader. Be a global leader by leveraging diversity with equity, inclusion, and engagement. And share your journey. This may empower others to be bold change agents. Be courageous, be authentic, be vulnerable.
Diversity Straight Up, brought to you by Green State Credit Union.
Keeping it real.